So migration is a big threat to the continent. But why should our youth migrate from Africa to Europe? They risk dying in the Sahara. They are detained in some African countries that are bordering the Mediterranean. And when they go towards, if they don't sink in the Mediterranean Sea, the Chief of Defense Staff, sir, Your Excellencies, service chiefs, heads of security organs, our guests, good morning. Let me first of all thank the panel and the first panelist who gave a very good overview of the situation. Mine will be a provocative session so that we should be able to engage into discussions. I thank the college and the RDF leadership for having given me this opportunity, but for organizing this series of National Security Symposium. Today is taking place after 30 years of the genocide against the Tutsi. Rwanda has made remarkable progress, although we are still grappling with the effects of what went through in 1994. And what we went through in 1994 actually has a very direct relevance to the topic that we are discussing today. In 1994, we saw a genocidal government that involved the whole society of Rwanda to kill ourselves. We had radicalization, and we had youths that were organized into killing machines, especially the Interahamwe. Today, these very genocidal forces are in existence, and they still pose a threat. Again, we meet today when the world is undergoing tectonic changes. If you look at the global situation today, there's global power, superpower competition. There's no cooperation. It's as if we are actually rewriting a new global order, from unilateralism to multilateralism. So with all these changes, Africa definitely has got to feature somewhere. And how does it feature? It's as if we don't count on the global stage. We are just looked at as a continent where the whole global competition is for resources on the African continent, or we are viewed as a continent whereby there are national security threats to all these other countries, especially from the global north. So where does that leave us as Africans? That's why I indicated that the college, the RDF, organizing this National Security Symposium is very important for us as Africans, and also our colleagues that are actually participating. Because at the end of the day, the African continent will continue to play a role on the global scene, whether positively or negatively. To understand today's security challenges, especially this very topic of youth radicalization and violent extremism, we need to reflect back. What are the underlying causes? Why has this continent been what it has been? The current issues that we have can just be seen from what Africa has been suffering through for ages. I'll mention just a few of them. Slavery. Slavery and the impact that it made on our continent. We lost a youthful population to the Americas, to Europe, to Middle East. So Africa was denied of its strength And therefore, the impact as we face it today, we need to face it and trace it back in those times. Secondly, colonialism. The impact of colonialism and destruction of African countries, or rather African peoples, our cultures, our development is still prevalent today. We are still nursing the effect of colonialism. It should not be a pretext to us as Africans, but if we do not look at the colonial legacy, then we are not going to understand the challenges that we are facing today. Third, the mismanagement of post-colonial independence phase on our continent. Whereas we started very well with our Pan-African leaders clamoring for independence, did we achieve our aspirations as independent African states? How did we manage the independence period as to give the Africans their rightful place and their true independence that they looked for? The final one is the current phase whereby we are facing globalization and the advance of technology. So all these challenges have a huge impact on the African continent, and if not well managed, definitely are causes of what we see today. So, what is the narrative regarding Africa? Several countries, several continents, several regions actually engage in national security discussions, debates. I'll mention just a few of them. For instance, the Munich International Security Conference that takes place in Germany, in Munich, every year around February. It brings together European countries and the US under what is called Transatlantic Alliance. Under those conferences, they are discussing about global threats and how these countries, especially the global north, are able to confront the global challenges and advance their own national security interests. There are some others like the Shanghai, whatever for the Far East, Russia, China, and whatever. But where do we feature as an African continent to discuss our own national security issues and issues that affect our populations? I've been privileged to attend some of these conferences regularly, and I can assure you there are only a few countries from Africa. Rwanda is always present, and the discussions on the continent are always discussing about the threat the African continent is posing on the global north. And what are these security challenges? Migration, radicalization, extremism, and terrorism on the African continent. And these countries are actually plotting policies on how to confront and contain Africa. So I used to wonder, why should the African continent be labeled the way it is? I'm using the Munich Security Conference as an example. If you go into the academia, if you go into the media landscape, the African continent is always taken as that continent whereby you are either going to get resources or to contain the security threat that is coming from there. How do we contain the Africans? At the end of the day, we as Africans also parrot the same narratives that are being propagated from the north. So it's true there are definitely challenges on the African continent, and my sister highlighted all the issues very well academically. But you ask yourself, which continent does not have these challenges? If you go to Europe and you look at the populism and the advance of political parties and governments that are going towards the far right, looking at petty nationalism, there is no difference between that kind of populism and the way African continent and African governments are actually becoming more tribalistic. But when we are talking about the African continent, we portray it as the worst continent. No, it's not the worst continent. There are very positive aspects on the African continent. It's only that we have not managed to govern ourselves and look at how we address the current challenges and threats, and therefore we engage into the real governance and development of our continent. So, do I blame the global north? Do I blame the developed world? Not at all. I'm just throwing the challenge to us as Africans. Do we love our countries? Do we love our people? Or we hate them? For diplomatic reasons, I'm not going to mention countries because each person is usually very patriotic to his own country. But you consider the status of governance in your own country. Do you fear your population? Do you fear your youth? What is the status of governance in your own country? What programs are there for the development of the country to give the youth hope? We fear our own populations. We fear our own youth. That's why our youth are struggling to migrate to the global north, to Europe. And as I indicated, this is not a problem only from Africa. If you go to Latin America and you look at the migration, the people that move to the United States of America, I think every single year they must be going between 6 and 10 million people that are moving from Latin America to the US. So migration is a big threat to the continent. But why should our youth migrate from Africa to Europe? They risk dying in the Sahara. They are detained in some African countries that are bordering the Mediterranean. And when they go towards, if they don't sink in the Mediterranean Sea, they are put in quasi-prisons even in European countries. So migration becomes a problem. Who is to blame? Let's look at the responsibilities of us as African countries to be able to stop this problem. So if it is not migration, then there is this radicalization. My sister went into all these details. How do we have this radicalization? If you don't have a youth that is educated, that is employed, that has aspirations of a better future, it gives room now for non-governed spaces and yes, the interference from external factors will come towards the radicalization of our youth. How are they radicalized? The issue of religious radicalization, religious extremism. Currently, we are talking about the Islamic radicalization. But Rwanda, historically, the problems that we have faced, we have not only Islamic radicalization has been a small component of it. How about Christian radicalization? Do we ever even discuss about Christian radicalization? On the Rwandan context, we had the problem of colonialism that was actually propagated alongside the white fathers. The Christian, the Catholic entrenchment here on this country has been the source of divide and rule and radicalized our youth. So, when you are talking about religious extremism, let's also put it into context. Yes, there is the current threat of Islamic radicalization, but we should not parrot it from the Western view of radicalization and violent extremism alone. Because Rwanda is an example of what we went through in 1994, the Interahamwe's and the 10 Commandments from the Bible that were used by these extremists are live examples of how this country has been destroyed. The weak and stagnant economies. How have we invested in our economies as the African continent? With all the natural resources of the continent, the multinational corporations that come and invest in these countries are just extractive industries that come, mine, and take all the raw materials, and the value chain is done in these Western countries, that's where the employment takes place. So you have not managed your own governance system. We have not managed to govern our economic systems, and therefore we end up unemployed. Of course, our youth will definitely be attracted to the areas because of even the narrative that has been set. The international media houses are working for the global north or for these developed countries. They portray their countries as the most civilized, the most developed. So our youth are being attracted. At the end of the day, we all become victims of the narratives and the policies that we have set up in place. So how has Rwanda tried to sort out these problems? Number one, Rwanda is not an island. We have a fair share of contribution to the global threats, continental threats, and at the same time try to address our own problems. On the African continent, we have seen how Rwanda has contributed not only to peacekeeping, but also the building of the African security architecture. We have contributed to international peacekeeping. We are currently number 4, biggest troop and police contributing country, but we do not only contribute to these peacekeeping operations, but also bring in new paradigms, including the responsibility to protect the use of our women in police, to address gender violence. And why am I mentioning this? Because even when we address the security challenges that we have, we end up actually contributing to the problem rather than addressing the real problem, because we employ kinetic means without understanding the problem, the root causes of the problem. We end up actually injuring the women and youth, and therefore, because of the mistakes that government interventions take, then we end up actually creating room for recruitment and radicalization of our youth. So by Rwanda's contribution, we bring in Rwanda's lessons learned of what we went through in 1994. So Rwanda's peacekeeping model, modeled both on the multilateral peacekeeping, but also bilateral interventions, and working together with our friendly African countries, governments, examples of Mozambique and Central African Republic, whereby we do not only fight the extremists, the terrorists, but we work with the governments and civil society towards actually the practical de-radicalization process by addressing the real concerns of the population, of the youth, of the women, and therefore the population sees the government intervention as actually an alternative to what the extremists have been preaching to them, that the governments are predators against the population. So this is one of the lessons of Rwanda's contribution. The second contribution, in 2019, when we had a huge population, Rwandan population for sub-Saharan Africa moving towards Europe, many of them dying in the Sahara, some of them being caught up in the Libya situation. Rwanda worked with the African Union, and we agreed that, you know what, other than these African youths either being in detention centers or mistreated or dying in the Mediterranean, why can't we actually bring them to Rwanda, and then we build a better way of processing these people? Since 2019, we have received thousands of these youth and work with our Western partners who process relocation to Europe or to Canada, to the US. Even recently, we have seen some going to Australia. So this kind of example, if it can be emulated by several other countries, on top of addressing our own governance problems, our own economic shortfalls, should be able to give another hope to the African youths, but also prevent the radicalization and its impact. Currently, we are in discussion with UK on the UK-Rwanda migration deal. The way it is being portrayed in the media, it's actually as if Rwanda is the one that is in the dock. Yet, the UK approached Rwanda. We said, okay, if you cannot actually host these people, Rwanda would be ready to host them in humane conditions under international law, but you are also going to bear the cost. The UK says, yes, we are going to bear the cost. And what does this cost include? It includes the livelihood of these people, but also the employment of these youth and other professionals that the continent is actually losing to Europe and to UK. So these models, including others like where we are seated today, investment in infrastructure. If our continent has not invested in infrastructure, Rwanda as a small country, the leadership has decided to invest in infrastructure that are going to be a catalyst for the employment of the youth. Not only do we host the international conferences, but we are now moving towards sports infrastructure whereby you include the hopes of youth, the magnitude of youth that should go into the sports industry, the cultural industry. If you can be able to have this kind of infrastructure and then you host global sporting events. As we speak, we hold this National Security Conference, we are going to host BAL, the Basketball Africa. Now, if we can bring all the African youth in terms of competitions, in terms of employment, then this is a practical way of actually drawing the youth away from radicalization, from being exposed to these negative tendencies, to the actual aspirations of the youth, and which also end up actually giving employment to the countries, development of our countries, but also an effective way of deterrence. Youth Connect, the current Youth Connect, whereby we want to bring all our youth, African youth, together. We discuss our own problems. We promote civic and socio-economic development. Then we have several other programs, Rwandan Youth Volunteers, Arts Hands, investment in the culture, Youth Connect, and other programs, by even investing in academic infrastructure that should also be relevant to the current job market and the global changes in technology. So I want to end up by commenting about a few things. Recently, just last week, Rwanda hosted CEO Forum. We had several presidents and chief executives from the world, including from the continent. Just seated here on this panel were two people. One was Dangote, Aliko Dangote from Nigeria. He's the richest man on the continent. He was also seated with Patrick Puyo, the CEO of Total. What struck me is that Aliko Dangote said that he needs 35 visas to move on the African continent. 35 visas. In other words, Aliko Dangote, the billionaire, has got to go to each and every country embassy to apply for a visa so that he comes to your country to be able to invest. The CEO of Total might not need any. So, what is the problem with us Africans? Not only do we fear our own people in our own countries, but we fear our own brothers from our neighboring countries. What has Rwanda done? We've abolished visas. You can just come to the international airport, anyone from anywhere from the world, you get your visa and come and enter into Rwanda. Rwanda has been championing this. We had a recent AU conference in West Africa regarding visa regime. But I can assure you, it was only 4 countries that have ratified this protocol on eradication of visas on the continent. So as we grapple with this problem of youth and violent extremism, let's think about what we are doing as a continent. Our neighborhood here, the Eastern DRC, we have all these, what I have mentioned, grouped together in that country. But I'll mention a few things. 1994, these youth radicalized under the Interahamwe and genocidal forces migrated to, were orderly, in an orderly way under UN Security Council resolution, withdrawn to Congo. They were protected there for 30 years. They have spread genocide ideology, and we have a population that is radicalized, that is fighting against their own colleagues, brothers and sisters, and as a result, Congo has got 262 armed groups. 262 armed groups. It's a global record. No single country has got as many armed groups on the continent, in the world as Congo has. And this is a phenomenon whereby if there is lack of governance, if there is poor leadership, if there is ungoverned spaces, the population is going to try and look for their own ways of survival. And the majority of all these 262 armed groups are mainly composed of youth. So as we talk about youth radicalization and violent extremism on the continent, let's be very conscious of our own failures, the external factors, but what we need to do as a continent, as our own countries, to be able to survive in these global changes that are taking place today. Thank you so much.
Just one question from myself. You talked about the narrative. Now, can I just ask you, is it not up to Africa to really construct that narrative for itself, instead of worrying about what the US, what the UK says about us? Why is Africa not, having its own narrative?
Absolutely. The onus is on us to build our own narrative, as much as the onus is on us to build our own countries and continent. The development of our continent, of our countries, lies with us. And the least where we invest is in the youth. As you, in your opening remarks, the youth make the majority of our continent, in Rwanda. And yet, how much do we invest in our youth? So we need to build our narrative, but how do you build the narrative? You need to build the narrative if you have a program, if you have a policy, if you have governance, you have leadership. And if it is lacking, therefore, the global north is definitely going to continue building the narrative. And they have never built a positive narrative on the continent, right from slavery, colonialism, post-independence, and even today. If you read any article in any global media, and they talk anything positive on any African country, then there must be a problem with that media, because they must be recruiting that one to be able to devour them. So they build that negative narrative. It is upon us to build a positive narrative by doing the right things and reporting the right things, even investing even in our intelligentsia, our academia, our countries. I told you about how we fear our own people. So we fear them, they migrate to Europe. We fear them, we depopulate ourselves. We fear them, we lose even the skilled personnel that we have, and they go and build these other economies. So we need to build our own narrative.